After tensions boiled for years, Pakistan has finally done the unthinkable. It has launched an all-out war against the Afghan Taliban, sparking a conflict that feels like it's edging us closer to World War III. As bombs drop in Ukraine, Russia, Iran, and in the US military bases throughout the Middle East, another region is on the brink of chaos as an open war develops between two terrifying powers. In what is the latest and perhaps most dangerous flare-up of tensions between Pakistan and the Taliban-run Afghanistan, a series of border conflicts has devolved into what Pakistan's Defense Minister, Khawaja Mohammad Asif, now calls open war, which he claims that Pakistan is willing to wage against the Taliban because it has run out of patience. How on earth did we get here? Why is this war happening now? And what does it mean for Pakistan, Afghanistan, and the region at large? We'll be exploring the many answers to the latter two questions as the video progresses, so be sure to stick with us. But as far as how we got here, it all started on February 26th, when the Taliban's military arm launched a series of attacks on Pakistani positions across the Durand Line, which is essentially the border that separates Pakistan from Afghanistan. Winding about 1,600 miles through mountains and deserts, that disputed border has been the flashpoint for confrontations between Pakistan and the Taliban in the past, as you'll discover soon, and it served that purpose once again. According to the BBC, the Taliban offensive was launched at around 8 p.m. local time and ran across the border provinces near Kunar, Khost, Nangarhar, Nuristan, Paktia, and Paktika, several of which are homes to Pakistani military bases. The Taliban claims that it launched its raids on these bases in response to Pakistan's February 22nd strikes against what Pakistan claimed were militant camps in Afghan territory, which CNN called at the time a serious test of an uneasy peace between the neighbors. February 26th saw that test end in failure. Afghanistan's Taliban attacked back. The Taliban border strikes led to an almost instant response from Pakistan, claiming that the Taliban had miscalculated and opened unprovoked fire on multiple locations across the northwestern province of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Pakistan launched a series of bombing raids against what it claims to be Taliban positions in Afghanistan during the early hours of February 27th, which included several attacks against border provinces and strikes against targets in Kabul. CNN adds that Pakistan was also believed to have specifically targeted Kabul because it's the birthplace of Hibatullah Akhundzada, who is the secretive leader of the Taliban. Whether the strikes were designed to take Akhundzada out or if they were simply meant to be symbolic isn't yet known, though Pakistan's labeling its response to the Taliban's border attacks as Operation Righteous Fury suggests the former. If Pakistan did indeed intend to kill the Taliban's leader, there is no confirmation that it was successful. The Taliban certainly wouldn't confirm its leader's death, even if it had happened. In the wake of Pakistan's response, the Taliban spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, took to X to create a post that has since been deleted. In that post, he claimed that the Taliban had responded to these Pakistani attacks with strikes against military positions in Helmand and Kandahar, though how true this claim may be is up for debate, especially as the post claiming the strikes was deleted soon after it was posted. Pakistan has also claimed that Taliban drones have targeted 3 locations since the fighting began. 2 of those are military targets, including a military academy in Abbottabad and an artillery school in Nowshera. However, one of the Taliban's drones reportedly failed near a primary school in Swabi. If that drone was intended to strike the school, it would mean that the Taliban is targeting civilians, and the use of drones by the Taliban for military purposes is also unprecedented, as the organization was previously thought to only have access to civilian drones. Right now, the countries are engaged in tit-for-tat exchanges. Deaths are starting to mount up, though how extensive the casualties truly are is difficult to determine. CNN reports that the Taliban was claiming that Pakistan's strikes had killed 19 civilians and injured a further 26 as of February 27th. Supposedly, most of those casualties were women and children, though this claim may be a ploy by the Taliban to score some propaganda points. Each side has delivered its own figures of how many fighters have died. According to the Taliban, 55 Pakistani soldiers have died in the Taliban strikes, which have led the Taliban to claim that it has taken 19 posts from Pakistan. These gains were made with the comparatively modest losses of 8 Taliban fighters to death, along with 11 wounded. However, Pakistan's Prime Minister's spokesperson, Mosharraf Zaidi, paints a much different picture. He claims that 297 of the Taliban's fighters have been killed, along with over 450 injured as of February 27th. The truth is difficult to determine when both sides are making such wildly different claims. Adding to the confusion, most media outlets are adding a disclaimer to their reports, noting that they haven't been able to independently verify any of the figures that either Pakistan or the Taliban are sharing. What is abundantly clear so far is that it has been a bloody confrontation. Depending on who you believe, it was sparked either by a Pakistani attack on Taliban bases in Afghanistan or by a series of Taliban strikes along the border it shares with Pakistan. Either way, there has been around a week of fighting that shows no signs of coming to an end anytime soon. As CNN points out, Pakistan and Afghanistan have been here before. Since October, the two countries and their leaderships have maintained a very shaky ceasefire, which was signed in the wake of another deadly conflict. However, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, says that this October conflict primarily focused on the border regions. The strikes we've seen toward the end of February, particularly those conducted by Pakistan, seem to be venturing beyond those regions. In other words, what was once a border dispute, albeit a bloody one, has descended into the open war that Pakistan claims it to be. The obvious question has to be asked: why? We've already covered one of the reasons, which seems to be the spark that set the whole thing off. The Taliban in Afghanistan believes that Pakistan violated the ceasefire agreement between the two nations when it launched its strikes against the supposedly militant bases on Afghanistan's territory. Pakistan would claim differently, arguing that these bases were occupied by terrorists who have been operating in Pakistan. And that brings us to the reason behind the trigger point, or at least one of them. Pakistan accuses Afghanistan of harboring terrorists that have been wreaking havoc in Pakistan for years. According to Pakistan's leadership, the Taliban government in Afghanistan has been supporting anti-Pakistani terrorists, who Pakistan claims are carrying out a widespread campaign of suicide attacks across the country. The Taliban claims that this is nonsense and that the territory of Afghanistan isn't being used to present any sort of threat to another nation, which in turn leads to the Taliban's claims that Pakistan's military is doing little more than carrying out unprovoked attacks against Afghanistan's civilians. Again, it's tit for tat. Each claim by Pakistan is countered by a claim from the Taliban, and neither side is backing down. One thing is for certain: Pakistan has a point about terrorism in its territory, though it isn't clear how much of that terrorism is being perpetrated by the Taliban directly versus people who are operating individually or as part of sects that support the Taliban but have no direct involvement with it. We have seen a consistent increase in terrorist activity in Pakistan over the last few years. According to the US Department of State, the number of terrorist attacks in Pakistan, along with the number of casualties caused by those attacks, rose by 50% compared to the figures from 2022. The perpetrators of these attacks were varied, including local ISIS branches, the Balochistan Liberation Army, and the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, or TTP. Keep that last group in mind. We'll be coming back to the TTP later. By 2025, the South Asia Terrorism Portal, or SATP, along with the Institute for Conflict Management, ranked Pakistan second in its Global Terrorism Index. The number of deaths caused by terrorist attacks in the country had risen to 1,081 over the year leading up to SATP's 2025 index, which it says was an increase of 45% over the previous year. The TTP was responsible for about half of these attacks, resulting in 558 deaths in 2024 alone. To Pakistan, these substantial increases in terrorist activity on its own soil can all be linked back to Afghanistan and its Taliban regime. Again, the Taliban denies this, but according to the CSIS, Afghanistan under the Taliban's rule has a track record of providing a safe haven to terrorists from groups like the TTP and Al-Qaeda. Furthermore, the sharp increase in violence within Pakistan coincides with the Taliban rising to power in Afghanistan back in 2021, when US forces departed from the country. So Pakistan may have a point on the terrorism front. However, it has more reasons for declaring open war on Afghanistan, one of which seems utterly insane. But before we get to those reasons, along with what's going to happen next, this is a reminder that you are watching The Military Show. We bring you the full picture, not just the headlines, so subscribe to the channel to stay ahead of the curve. Now, before we get to the craziest reason behind Pakistan declaring open war on the Taliban, let's come back to the Durand Line. We told you earlier that most of the fighting between Pakistan and the Taliban has taken place across this massive border, and there is a good reason for it. Both the Taliban and successive Afghan governments before it have refused to recognize the validity of the Durand Line for years because of how it was formed. According to the CSIS, the line was created back in 1893 as an attempt by the UK to shield the British Raj from the Russian Empire. When the UK created this line, it didn't consider how it would affect the Pashtun communities that live in and around the new border that it had created. That's important because the Taliban today is dominated by the Pashtun movement, which is likely what draws the group to dispute and fight across the Durand Line. Pakistan has had chances to smooth over this dispute, according to the Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI. The fact that it hasn't could even be considered a diplomatic mistake, especially as the Durand Line was created by a country that is no longer operating in Pakistan and hasn't been for close to a century. Consistent refusals to do anything about the conflict engulfing this border had led to Pakistan creating what Rusi calls a Frankensteinian monster out of the Taliban. In other words, a group that Pakistan once supported is now responsible for many of the issues that have led to open war because Pakistan hasn't done enough to deal with the Durand Line issue. Again, Pakistan would surely argue this. It would claim that a border that has been in place for well over a century should simply be respected at this point, even if it breaks up the community that forms the backbone of the Taliban. As is so often the case, regional disputes are escalating into something far worse. And with that, we come back to what is perhaps the most insane reason for Pakistan's decision to declare open war, along with its constant fighting against the Taliban beforehand: India. Specifically, and as CSIS points out, Pakistan accuses the Taliban of being little more than a proxy for India. The basis for this claim seems to lie in the fact that India has provided humanitarian aid to Afghanistan while it was under Taliban rule, along with sending diplomatic contacts into the country. Pakistan's claim ignores the fact that India has historically aligned itself with groups that battle the Taliban, such as the Northern Alliance and the US. Still, some in Pakistan now claim that Afghanistan has become a colony of India. These include Khwaja Asif, the Pakistani defense minister we mentioned earlier, who took to X in the wake of the Taliban's bombings of Pakistan to claim that it was expected that peace would reign in Afghanistan once the Taliban took over and the US withdrew from the country. However, the Taliban turned Afghanistan into a colony of India. Pakistan made every effort, both directly and through friendly countries, to keep the situation stable. It carried out extensive diplomacy. However, the Taliban became a proxy of India, Asif declared. This is all very debatable, especially as India worked to maintain basic diplomatic ties with Afghanistan for far longer than the Taliban has been in power in the country. Some might argue that Pakistan is now using its war against the Taliban to score points against one of its major regional and geopolitical rivals. Still, with the reasons for the open war between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban covered, we move on to what happens next, and it's here where things get a little difficult. Pakistan said on February 28 that it would hold no dialogue with Afghanistan's Taliban regime in the wake of what has happened over the last couple of weeks, which suggests that the skirmishes and strikes that we're seeing right now are the first stages of a much larger war. If that war happens, Pakistan, at least on paper, is the much stronger force. That's according to both CNN and Global Firepower, which ranks military nations each year based on dozens of factors. According to Global Firepower, Pakistan has the advantage in almost every department. It has 660,000 active personnel in its military, compared to the 75,000 believed, because different sources stated plus 170,000 active personnel, to be available to the Afghan Taliban. Pakistan also has 550,000 reserves compared to the zero that the Taliban has, along with 500,000 paramilitary forces versus 90,000 in Afghanistan. Pakistan has a defense budget of more than $9 billion. Afghanistan only spends $145 million on its military per year. The Afghan Taliban also has practically no air force or land power, outside of about 4,000 armored vehicles compared to the 59,000 plus that Pakistan has, along with its 2,677 tanks and thousands of units of artillery. As a landlocked nation, Afghanistan also has no navy, so it's possible that Pakistan could use its fleet of 120 assets to launch attacks on the Taliban. CNN adds that what the Taliban has in terms of military assets amounts to little more than some Soviet-era helicopters and whatever the US abandoned when it withdrew from the country. Oh, and Pakistan has nuclear weapons. 170 of them, according to the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. Granted, Pakistan is unlikely to use these types of weapons against the Taliban, but the fact that it has them, on top of everything else available to the Pakistani military, suggests that any war should be a whitewash for Pakistan. But it won't be. At least Pakistan's victory wouldn't come easily if a ceasefire isn't declared. One of the reasons for this is the TTP, which you may recall we asked you to keep in mind earlier. That group, which operates inside Pakistan, is one of the terrorist organizations that Pakistan accuses the Afghan Taliban of sheltering. It's a claim that makes sense. The second T in TTP stands for Taliban, after all. And even though the Taliban has mediated between Pakistan and the TTP in the past, CSIS says that the Taliban tends to come out in favor of the TTP more often than not. Pakistan's TTP problem is that this is just the sort of group that feeds into the one tactic that the Taliban has that could mitigate all of Pakistan's massive military advantages: guerrilla warfare. There's a good reason why the US withdrew from Afghanistan, clearing the way for a Taliban takeover in the process. The Taliban is very good at conducting damaging warfare against enemies with limited resources. And in the TTP, the Taliban has a group that has professed allegiance, as CSIS notes, and is believed to have between 30 and 35,000 members per the United Nations. That's not enough members to engage in an all-out conventional war with Pakistan, of course, but there are certainly enough people for a guerrilla war inside Pakistan that sees terrorist activity escalate. Suicide bombings, ambushes, and the general wreaking of havoc against Pakistan's military bases could all be conducted by the TTP on the Afghan Taliban's behalf, weakening Pakistan from the inside as the war rages. The BBC adds that any war that occurs between Pakistan and the Afghan Taliban will be far from conventional. Even as Pakistan has started to target Afghan government facilities with its strikes, the BBC notes that the extensive guerrilla warfare experience that the people whom the Taliban has placed into its government could pay off in a full-scale war. The Taliban wouldn't be trying to win in the conventional sense of destroying Pakistan's army. It would do what it did against the US. Even if Pakistan occupies Afghanistan, there would be no end to the conflict. The Taliban would splinter into hundreds of pockets all across the country, and with the help of the TTP inside Pakistan itself. Any victory that Pakistan achieves would come at a massive ongoing cost that it would be paying for years. Pakistan also has its economy to worry about, as highlighted by the Eurasia Group's South Asia analyst Pramit Pal Chowdhury, who says Pakistan cannot afford to go to war with the Taliban. Their economy is in tatters. Fighting a similarly conventional force might be possible for Pakistan due to the size and strength of its military, but fighting against one that Chowdhury labels essentially a coalition of militia, as expensive and a long-term process that Pakistan is unlikely to be able to sustain. In short, neither side is in a position to roundly defeat the other, and that situation works for the Taliban far more than it does for Pakistan. Perhaps that's why other South Asian regional leaders are already calling for an end to hostilities. Iran was offering to mediate between the two sides when the latest hostilities broke out. However, how available that option might be now is up in the air that the US and Israel have launched their own campaign against Iran's regime, which has left the country's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei, dead. The United Nations, China, and the UK have all called for de-escalation, as has Mujahid, the Taliban spokesperson, who said on February 27th that, "Now too we want the issue to be resolved through dialogue." But Pakistan has said no to dialogue, at least so far. And that leaves the situation in Southeast Asia on a knife edge. If Pakistan is serious about its cup of patience having run out, what we're seeing now may be little more than the calm before a massive storm that could engulf the entire South Asian continent in war. And if that happens, World War III may not be too far behind, as far too many countries have interests in that portion of the world. After all, conflict between India and Pakistan, which may yet happen based on Pakistan's claims of the Afghan Taliban being a proxy for India, is one of 5 possible flashpoints for the eruption of World War III in 2026. You can find out all about that, along with the other 4 flashpoints in our video. And if you got value out of this video, be sure to subscribe to The Military Show for more analysis on the latest developments in global warfare. And thank you as always for watching.